The moment a narcissist realizes you're too strong, watch what happens. There comes a moment, a divine interruption, when the veil lifts and you finally see the game for what it is. The lies, the charm, the cycles, they lose their power the moment you remember who you are. This isn't just self-confidence, it's spiritual clarity. It's when your soul refuses to be caged by manipulation. And when a narcissist sees that light flicker back on in your eyes, make no mistake, they feel it. Not as inspiration, but as a threat. Because the very thing they worked so hard to break is now standing, unshaken, stronger than ever. Today, I'm not here to talk about pain. I'm here to talk about the power that emerges when you stop shrinking and start reigning. Watch what happens when strength walks into the room. When identity is rooted in truth, manipulation loses its grip. Manipulation only works where there is confusion about identity. That's why narcissists don't just attack your choices. They go after your sense of self. They don't want your attention, they want your foundation. Because if they can make you question who you are, they never have to worry about what you might become. But there is a shift that happens, a spiritual awakening, when you begin to root your identity in truth. Not opinions, not applause, not trauma, not roles, not titles. Truth, and truth is not a feeling, it's a revelation. You begin to realize that your value was never in their hands to begin with. You're not valuable because someone loved you. You're valuable because you were created with intention. Purpose isn't assigned by people, it's installed by God. And when that reality takes root in your spirit, the entire game changes. The words that used to wound you now sound like noise. The tactics that used to trap you now look like theater. Their emotional hooks can't latch onto someone who has nothing left to prove. You stop explaining yourself. You stop apologizing for your boundaries. You stop shrinking to be more digestible because you finally see the trap for what it is. A desperate attempt to define you before you define yourself. That's why narcissists panic, not when you walk away, but when you wake up. They're not afraid of your absence. They're afraid of your clarity, because clarity kills control. You start to notice how every compliment came with a condition, how every gift came with a grip, how every apology was just bait for more access. But when identity is rooted in truth, those patterns lose power. You no longer need to be liked to feel whole. You no longer chase closure from someone who profits off your confusion. You stop performing. You stop negotiating your value at the altar of their approval, and suddenly they can't reach you. They may still talk. They may still provoke. They may still smear. But it doesn't land, because you're not standing where you used to stand. And here's the thing they notice. A narcissist is hyper, sensitive to shifts in energy because control is their currency. They can sense when you stop reacting, stop engaging, stop needing them to validate your worth. And when that happens, watch closely, because the masks begin to slip. What was once flattery becomes sarcasm. What was once support becomes sabotage. But now, instead of being shaken, you're steady, because you've tapped into something deeper than approval. You've tapped into truth. And truth doesn't waver under pressure. It doesn't dilute under gaslighting. It doesn't bend under guilt. Truth stands tall even when you're standing alone. And what's most powerful is this. When you're rooted in truth, you don't just break free, you stay free. You stop repeating the cycle with different faces. You stop trying to fix what was never your assignment. You stop rescuing people who feed off your weakness and call it love. You realize that being strong doesn't mean being hard, but it does mean being clear. It means you know the sound of your own voice again. It means you trust your instincts again. It means you stop abandoning yourself to make others comfortable. That's what terrifies a narcissist, because they can't build a throne on someone who knows they were born royalty. This kind of strength isn't loud, but it's undeniable. It doesn't need to fight, it stands. It doesn't need to prove, it radiates. It doesn't chase revenge, it walks in peace. But that peace is disruptive to those who thrived off your chaos. They'll call you cold, distant, difficult, because you've stopped being predictable. You've stopped being available to dysfunction. And that's when the manipulation dies, not because they stopped playing, but because you stopped participating. You realized the only reason the web worked is because you kept dancing in it. But now you've stepped out, and what they built to trap you becomes a prison of their own making. And here's the beauty, you don't even have to fight them. You just have to be rooted, because rooted people don't move with storms, they rise above them. They don't chase shadows, they walk in light. They don't crumble under criticism, they flourish under pressure. You don't need to match their energy, you don't need to expose them. Truth will do what it always does. It will rise, it will shine, and it will speak for itself. Your stability will frustrate their chaos. Your peace will confront their control. Your healing will silence their narrative. So let them talk, let them twist, let them speculate. You don't owe anyone access to a version of you that no longer exists. The one who used to beg, explain, and justify is gone. What's left is someone who knows who they are, knows what they carry, and knows who they serve. That is the death of manipulation. That is the moment freedom begins. And that is the moment a narcissist realizes they no longer have a place in your story. The moment you stop needing their approval, you become untouchable. Approval is the currency of control. As long as you need it, they own you. That's why narcissists invest so much in crafting a false version of love, one that feels like connection but functions like captivity. They make their validation feel like oxygen so that you forget you were already breathing before they arrived. It starts subtly, a compliment, a touch of admiration, the illusion of being seen. But underneath it all is the trap, conditioning yourself, worth to their opinion, grooming your identity to reflect their needs, and it works until something sacred inside of you wakes up. That quiet moment when you realize you've exhausted yourself trying to earn something that real love gives freely, that's the turning point. That's the shift in the atmosphere. When you stop needing their approval, you pull the plug on their power. They can no longer mold your decisions. They can't inflate your worth or deflate your joy, because the throne of your value has been repossessed, and it doesn't belong to them anymore. You become untouchable, not because you've hardened, but because you've healed. Approval no longer dictates your direction. You're not looking for applause from someone who clapped when you were weak. You've discovered a deeper compass, purpose, identity, conviction. You don't walk into rooms wondering if you're enough. You walk in knowing that you were sent. And when you carry that kind of assurance, people can feel it. Narcissists especially, because their power isn't rooted in strength. It's rooted in your insecurity. And when your insecurity dies, their influence dies with it. They start testing your buttons, revisiting your wounds, whispering the same familiar lies. But none of it sticks, not because they've changed, but because you have. You've stopped being the version of yourself that needed their validation to feel visible. You've grown, you've matured, you've risen, and now they no longer have a foothold in your mind. Watch closely, because this is the moment they start to unravel. Narcissists don't fear rejection, they fear irrelevance. And when you no longer chase their praise, they become irrelevant by default. It terrifies them. They'll start pushing harder, accusing louder, pretending you've changed for the worse, calling your boundaries selfish, your clarity prideful, your strength bitterness. But you won't be moved, because now you see their tactics for what they are: noise. and once you've tasted inner peace, you lose your appetite for emotional chaos. Their disapproval no longer makes you question yourself. It confirms you're on the right path, because anything that upsets a manipulator is often a sign of your growth, and growth isn't for their comfort, it's for your freedom. It's a strange thing when you no longer crave their praise. It's like walking out of a fog. You start seeing all the places where you adjusted yourself to fit a fantasy that was never about love. It was about control. You remember how they only lifted you when you were low enough to worship them, how their compliments came with expiration dates, how their love shrank when your voice got louder. But now you don't shrink. You don't apologize for shining. You don't tiptoe to keep the peace, because you've realized that peace built on silence isn't peace at all. It's a prison, and you were never created to live behind emotional bars. You've become dangerous, not in arrogance, but in authenticity. You're dangerous because you're no longer available for games, because you've separated love from manipulation, because you've traded approval for alignment. You've stopped asking, do they still like me? And started asking, am I still true to who I am? That shift changes everything. You begin building relationships based on mutual honor, not silent suffering. You begin attracting people who see you, not just what they can extract from you, and you begin living with a sense of wholeness that no external voice can shake. They'll try to guilt you. They'll say you're distant, ungrateful, cold, but the truth is you're simply whole, and whole people are never easy to manipulate. Wholeness doesn't bend to be accepted, it stands to be respected, and that, right there, is what makes you untouchable. You're no longer dancing for validation. You're no longer proving your worth. You've already received the only yes that matters, the one from within, the one rooted in divine identity, and once you've heard that voice, all others become background noise. So no, you don't need their praise, you don't need their permission to heal, you don't need their blessing to move forward. You've been approved by a higher calling, and you're walking like it. That doesn't mean you're perfect. It means you're planted, and planted people grow, planted people produce. Planted people outlast the storm. Let them talk. Let them spin their stories. You're not in the business of shrinking for anyone's comfort anymore. You've got too much purpose ahead to stay tangled in their dysfunction. This is your moment. The divine confirmation that you no longer need to perform for people who can't see your worth unless you're bleeding. You are enough without their applause, you are chosen without their agreement, and you are powerful without their platform. Walk in that, because the moment you stop needing their approval is the moment you become untouchable, not just to them, but to every system, every voice, every lie that ever tried to convince you that your worth was up for debate. Power shifts when purpose awakens. Silence becomes your sword. There's a moment in your journey where everything changes, not because your circumstances shift, but because your purpose finally wakes up. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself with thunder or lightning. It's subtle. It's internal. It's the moment when you realize you were never called to survive cycles. You were called to break them. You begin to feel a holy unrest, a sacred dissatisfaction with living small. The lies that once held you hostage start losing their volume. The drama that used to pull you in now looks like distraction. Why? Because purpose has entered the room, and when purpose awakens, power shifts. Not the kind of power that screams or controls, but the kind that stands rooted and unshakable. It's not about being louder than your oppressor. It's about being more aligned than their agenda. When you know why you're here, you stop reacting to every insult. You stop justifying your choices. You stop explaining your peace, because now silence has become your sword, not passivity. Power. A narcissist thrives on chaos because it blinds you from clarity. They bait you with drama, provoke you with twisted narratives, and feed on your reactions. Every time you explain, defend, or engage, you're stepping into their arena, one where truth is distorted and emotions are currency. But when purpose awakens, you stop entering that arena, not because you're weak, but because you're wise. You realize that not every attack deserves a response, that not every lie deserves your breath, that not every battle is yours to fight, because you've discovered a deeper strength, discernment. You understand that silence, when anchored in purpose, is not defeat, it's dominion. You're no longer trying to win arguments. You're focused on fulfilling assignments. You've outgrown the need to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. When purpose rises, your energy shifts. You don't have time to chase closure from conversations that only reopen wounds. You don't waste your anointing explaining your boundaries to people who benefit from crossing them. You've moved from survival to strategy. You're walking with intention now. That confuses narcissists. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't bite the bait. They can't manipulate someone who isn't desperate to be liked. And when you no longer react the way they expect, they begin to lose control. Not over the situation, but over you. That's the shift. That's the sword. You've learned how to fight without lifting your voice. You've learned how to win without entering the war. You're letting your transformation speak louder than your explanation. The most dangerous person to a narcissist is the one who knows their purpose, because purpose brings perspective. It helps you see through the fog of emotional chaos and spot the truth. It helps you understand that not every storm is sent to destroy you. Some storms are sent to reveal what needed to be shaken loose. You stop panicking when people leave. You stop grieving the loss of toxic connection. You recognize that pruning isn't punishment, it's preparation. And when you live with that kind of perspective, you become untouchable, not because life gets easier, but because you've become anchored. Narcissists can't manipulate someone who doesn't need external affirmation to feel internal peace. And here's what's even more powerful. When you start walking in silence, you start walking in authority. You don't have to prove what you already carry. You don't need to beg for space in rooms you've outgrown. The silence is not empty. It's filled with purpose. It speaks for you. It convicts. It exposes. It draws a line that words never could. They wonder why you're so calm, why you're not engaging, why you seem unaffected. It's because you finally understand your worth. You understand that royalty doesn't argue with rebellion. It stays on the throne. You're no longer entertaining clowns because you're building kingdoms. You're not defending your truth. You're living it. And that, right there, is where your power lies. Silence doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you've matured. It means you've stopped handing out explanations to people who have weaponized your words in the past. It means you've reclaimed your energy. You've realized that purpose doesn't need validation. It needs vision, and that vision is too sacred to waste on emotional chess games. So you don't flinch when they attack your character. You don't spiral when they ghost you. You don't beg for clarity from someone who profits from confusion. You just keep moving, because silence, for the healed and the focused, is not avoidance, it's elevation, and elevation doesn't need to be announced. It just shows. They'll say you've changed, and they're right. You've become the version of yourself they prayed you'd never meet, the one who knows, the one who sees, the one who refuses to return to the dungeon just because it's familiar. That version of you doesn't argue, doesn't beg, doesn't prove, because that version of you is dangerous, not for what you say, but for what you no longer need to say. Your silence is a mirror, and it shows them everything they tried to hide. Your stillness is a signal that their reign is over, not because you exposed them, but because you outgrew them. So yes, power shifts when purpose awakens, and when it does, silence becomes your weapon, your protection, your boundary, and your message. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight to be free. Just walk in purpose. And let your silence say everything. A narcissist thrives on weakness, but crumbles in the presence of wholeness. There is one thing a narcissist cannot control, cannot manipulate, cannot fake their way around, and that is wholeness, because wholeness is the death of their illusion. A narcissist doesn't choose victims randomly. They seek those with open wounds, unhealed insecurities, silent struggles, not to love them, but to use them, because weakness is their playground. It's where they build their altars. It's where they write their stories, about you, without you. As long as you remain fragmented, questioning yourself, unsure of your value, you are vulnerable to their scripts. That's how they trap you, not with chains, but with confusion. They mirror your desires, mimic your language, and pretend to be the answer to pain they secretly intend to deepen. They study your gaps so they can enter as your solution and later reign as your captor. That's why your weakness, your unhealed places are so vital to them. They feed off it. But something shifts the moment you decide to stop patching the surface and start healing the source. The moment you stop waiting for them to change and start changing how you see yourself, that's where wholeness is born. And the moment wholeness steps in, the narcissist begins to lose their grip. Wholeness isn't perfection, it's alignment. It's when every broken piece of your life has been brought before truth, before purpose, and reassembled with clarity. Wholeness is when you know who you are without needing someone else to remind you. It's when your peace no longer depends on their presence, when your smile isn't controlled by their mood, when your decisions are not dictated by their approval or disapproval. That is when you become a threat, not because you've become aggressive, but because you've become stable. And narcissists cannot coexist with stability. They panic when the chaos they've curated no longer affects you, when their words lose their sting, when their absence feels like relief, not punishment, because what they didn't anticipate was your healing. They were counting on you staying broken. They were betting on your silence, your fear, your dependency. But you rose. You gathered your strength. You faced your wounds, and you stopped bleeding where they expected you to keep hurting. That kind of inner transformation is louder than any confrontation. It doesn't just shift your posture, it shifts the power. Watch closely when wholeness enters the room. The narcissist who once dominated the space with arrogance, entitlement, and control will now begin to unravel, not because you're attacking them, but because your presence exposes what they tried to hide. Wholeness reveals the lies. It confronts the games without saying a word. Your peace becomes offensive to them. Your calm is unnerving. Your clarity threatens their confusion. They try to push buttons, but the buttons are gone. They attempt to guilt you, but shame no longer has a home. They tell their stories, twist their narratives, but you no longer defend yourself, because you don't live in their courtroom anymore. You've moved out of their mental prison and into your divine identity. That is what breaks their system, not rage, not revenge restoration. A narcissist is not afraid of strong people. They're afraid of whole people. There's a difference. You can be strong and still be bound. You can be outspoken and still be seeking approval. But wholeness means you've closed the doors they used to enter through. It means you've stopped offering access to people who can't handle responsibility. It means you've healed from the inside out. And now, manipulation echoes in an empty room. You've become immune to flattery. You've become disinterested in performance. You're no longer interested in impressing people who only love your wounds because they gave them leverage, and in that transformation you begin to see just how fragile the narcissist really was. Their power was never real. It was borrowed from your brokenness. The moment you reclaimed your pieces, their empire began to collapse. Wholeness changes how you speak. You stop defending every decision, stop over-explaining your no, stop apologizing for your healing. You start operating from conviction, not confusion, and the narcissist, who once thrived in the fog, now has no shadows left to hide in. They may accuse you of being cold, distant, or arrogant, but what they're really saying is you're no longer manipulatable, and you're not. You've outgrown the version of you who settled for crumbs because you didn't know you deserved a feast. You've outgrown relationships that were built on trauma bonds instead of truth. You no longer see yourself as a fixer, a savior, or an emotional caretaker. You see yourself as whole, and when you are whole, you attract wholeness. You align with peace. You value alignment over attachment. That's not pride, it's wisdom. The narcissist, now exposed, will often attempt one last act, a grand gesture, a fabricated crisis, a fake apology, but this time you see it, not with bitterness, but with clarity, and your response is different. You no longer engage in their drama. You no longer chase closure from a source that was never capable of truth. You have nothing to prove. You've healed to the point where their validation feels like noise, and that silence, that wholly grounded, unshakable silence, speaks louder than 1,000 confrontations. You are no longer participating in your own oppression, and because of that, you are now dangerous to every system, every lie, and every person who fed off the weaker version of you. So yes, a narcissist thrives in your weakness, but they crumble in your wholeness, because wholeness ends the cycle. It breaks the loop. It rewrites the narrative. You no longer see yourself as the victim. You see yourself as the victor. You no longer wear your wounds as identity. Wear your wisdom as armor, and the person who once manipulated you with fear now fades into irrelevance, because you've shifted. You've stepped into a new dimension, not of pride but of peace, not of ego but of essence, and in that space they can't follow, because what they once controlled, they no longer recognize. You've been reborn in truth, and that is the most powerful transformation of all. When you walk away with dignity, they lose access to your light. There comes a moment, quiet but divine, when you realize that your greatest revenge is not rage, not confrontation, not proving them wrong, but walking away with dignity. That moment is sacred. It's not born out of bitterness, but out of awakening. You no longer walk away because you're defeated. You walk away because you've discovered your worth. You no longer beg, plead, or explain. You don't shout to be heard. You've outgrown the stage, outgrown the script, outgrown the whole performance. You walk away, not with trembling, but with power in your stride, and what they don't expect, what truly shakes them, is your peace. They expected you to fall apart, to come crawling back, to stay entangled in the chaos they created. But when you choose dignity over dysfunction, silence over spectacle, and healing over attention, they lose the one thing they never deserved in the first place: access to your light. Narcissists don't grieve the loss of love. They grieve the loss of control, and when you walk away whole, with your head held high and your soul intact, you shatter the illusion they worked so hard to build. They no longer get to decide your worth. They no longer get to shape your narrative, your light, your essence, your peace, your presence. Was their supply, their fuel, their ego food. They needed your admiration, your confusion, your emotional energy, and when you step out of that dynamic without looking back, you starve their dysfunction, you break their cycle, you remove yourself as their mirror, and they are forced to face the hollowness they tried to hide. They never loved your heart. They loved your need, your weakness, your hope that one day they'd change. But when you walk away in dignity, that hope dies, and with it their power. There is unmatched power in a silent departure, not the kind driven by avoidance or fear, but by self-respect, because dignity says, I don't need to destroy you to redeem me. I don't need to retaliate. I don't need the last word. The last word is my life, my healing, my clarity, and narcissists don't understand that kind of strength, because their world is built on image, not integrity. They perform for power. You live from truth. That's why your absence speaks louder than your arguments ever did. It's not the walking away that breaks them. It's how you walk, with grace, with quiet, with sovereignty. You are no longer responding to their guilt trips or their fake apologies. You are not swayed by their crocodile tears or last-minute confessions, because when your light returns to you, you no longer outsource your value. You've come home to yourself, and don't think they won't notice. They will, they always do, but this time they have no access, no entry point. You've changed the locks, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. The doors they once walked through freely are now guarded by discernment, not bitterness, not revenge, discernment. You finally see the patterns. You see how they used praise as bait, how they weaponized your empathy, how they spun every truth into an accusation and every boundary into betrayal. But now you don't argue, you don't prove, you don't defend, because you realize that you were never the problem. You were simply the supply, and when you take back your supply, they are left with themselves, and that is a darkness they cannot stand to sit in. This kind of walking away is not passive, it's prophetic. It's a declaration to the universe that you will no longer tolerate half, love, broken covenants, or one-sided loyalty. It is a statement that says, I am no longer available for relationships that require me to abandon myself. That's not pride, that's alignment, and once you walk in that, you stop waiting for closure from those who only gave you confusion. You stop performing emotional CPR on relationships that flatlined long ago, and you stop lowering your light just to make someone else feel bright. You were not made to be dimmed. You were not made to be managed. You were made to be free, so you walk, with tears maybe, with trembling hands perhaps, but still, you walk, because dignity is not about pretending you were never hurt. It's about choosing not to let that hurt define you. You take the lesson, but you leave the shame. You acknowledge the pain, but you reclaim the power. And the narcissist, they are left in the ruins of a kingdom they thought they ruled, not because you burned it down, but because you no longer lived there. They call it abandonment, betrayal, ungratefulness, but you know the truth. It's liberation. You're not running. You're rising. You're not bitter. You're better. And that shift, that holy, quiet, undeniable shift, is the beginning of your freedom. They may try to re-enter. They may test your resolve. They'll try to trigger nostalgia, weaponize memories, appeal to your soft spots. But this time you see it. You see the pattern. You feel the peace that comes with staying gone. You remember the cost of staying connected, and you refuse to pay that price again. Your silence is your sword. Your boundaries are your armor, and your dignity, it's your crown. You're not walking away because you're weak. You're walking because you're done pretending that dysfunction is love. They lost access to your light the moment you chose yourself. The moment you stopped begging for them to see you, the moment you stopped explaining what they already understood, but never respected, that's when your light returned. That's when your energy stopped bleeding into the void, and that light, it's not just for you, it's for your future, for the version of you that's rising, for the purpose that was buried under their approval, for the calling that was muffled by your pain. That light is your inheritance, and you're reclaiming it one step, one breath, one decision at a time. So keep walking, not to prove a point, but to fulfill your purpose. You don't need their applause. You don't need their understanding. You don't need their closure. All you need is your peace, and the courage to protect it. Because when you walk away with dignity, you don't just leave a relationship. You reclaim a destiny. You become the answer to your own prayer. You become the healed version they never expected to meet, the one who glows from within, the one who knows, the one who chooses light not just as a feeling, but as a foundation. And when your light becomes your own again, they will feel the loss, but you will feel the freedom.